Yeah, hello. We are starting very soon with our webinar on the UK deal, but we wait probably for another 2 minutes until everyone is logged in. So bear with us for another 2 minutes until we start. Welcome already to those who are there.
Sorry.
So hello again to those who just joined. We are waiting another minute until everyone is able to dial in, and then we start with our webinar. Okay, so it is 1 minute after 12:30. I suggest we start. Yeah, sorry for the background noise, but it's a typical home office situation. Welcome in the name of Bernd Lange and myself to this presentation of a very, very interesting study concerning the Trade and Cooperation Agreement between the EU and the UK. Yeah, we will have the opportunity today to discuss with the author of a study that we had also sent around beforehand. I guess a lot of you had already had a look. Professor Dr. René Repasi, who will basically introduce us with his ideas of how to increase basically the power of the parliaments when it comes to this particular agreement, but of course also probably we can have some lessons learned on other trade agreements that are in the pipeline as well. Just very shortly from my side, some organizational remarks. Yeah, we will record this webinar after this presentation of Professor Repasi and a short comment of our Inter chair Bernd Lange and of me. We will have the opportunity to take on board your questions. You see the Q&A box, so please already now start writing your questions in this box and try to also vote on them. So we will have the questions that are most important to more people basically on top. Yeah, we will also send around in the chat the link to the study again so that you can check it out. We will have around 45 minutes to discuss the study with you, and yeah, looking forward to this presentation that is following now by Professor René Repasi, who is really one of the most renowned Brexit experts in Germany or probably also in Europe. So we are very happy to have you here. We are very happy that you drafted this important study. So yeah, René, over to you for the presentation.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Thanks a lot for organizing this seminar. I'm now going to share my presentation with you. You should now be able to have a look at it. Given the time constraints, I'm going to focus on the main points. And given the framework that this is organized by European parliamentarians, we'll also focus on the European Parliament when speaking of Parliament, though here is an S, so parliaments, hence I will nevertheless not say anything on the UK Parliament and also not on national parliaments, except for, of course, the question is later raised in discussion. Let me first give an idea why there is actually a need for stronger parliamentary rights. Don't forget the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, also called the Brexit deal, is a trade agreement, something that is nothing new under the sky in EU law, and where Parliament normally has not very much to say except for the ratification of the treaty itself. Yet the trade and cooperation agreement with the United Kingdom is a special kind of creature that requires, in my point of view, a need for stronger parliamentary rights, and one that can even find some arguments in the EU legal framework. And the main reason for requiring a stronger parliamentary rights is the danger to undermine current parliamentary rights. And what am I speaking of? Now, here we have the trade and cooperation agreement with the UK. Currently, it's only provisionally applicable. It is meant to be ratified by the European Parliament and the Council until the end of February, provided that there is no prolongation of this period of provisional application. But it also means that the actually entry into force, so the approval of what the European Union commits itself to, is done by the ratification vote of the European Parliament. And that means that if this agreement grows beyond the borders, what was agreed by the European Parliament, so this red area, that here something is committed to where the European Parliament at the moment of ratification didn't know what is going to happen. Now, not any delegation, as we would call this, is something new to the law, but it is a field that requires close scrutiny, and whether that is not having implications on parliamentary rights, since Parliament gave only explicit consent to what it knew originally. So what is happening with the agreement? How can it further develop outside a formal ratification process? Besides, we have European Union legislation in which the European Parliament is mostly involved by ordinary legislative procedure, where it has the right to amend legislative proposals and also to put them on hold. Here, the interesting question is what is happening if EU legislation, existing or future one, is in conflict with the trade and cooperation agreement. Now, if there is a direct conflict between what is mentioned in the agreement and existing legislation, then the obligations under the agreement prevail over EU legislation. In the hierarchy of norms, we have the treaties as the top of the pyramid. Then we have agreements that the EU concludes, and then there are secondary legal acts. So in case there is direct conflict, it's the treaty that prevails over current but also future union legislation. Moreover, and I think here it is more important to have a closer look, an uneven level playing field impacts further development of EU legislation. This was the very purpose why the Commission negotiated extensive level playing field rules in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, because a change of the level playing field has implications on the competitiveness between the European Union and the United Kingdom. And any competitiveness changes might create a pressure on the union legislator to either lower standards that were already acquired or to prevent from strengthening them, kind of de facto impact on the legislative process. This is in relation to the United Kingdom in particularly important because the trade relations that were established between the UK and the EU, they were for 40 years in a regular internal market setting. And that's different when we look at other third countries. Let's take Canada as an example, where the dangers are legally speaking the same, but have less of implications because of the lower trade relations. Hence, the need for stronger parliamentary rights derive from the protection of parliamentary prerogatives when it comes to the ratification of the treaty, and the protection of parliamentary prerogatives when it comes to the ordinary legislative procedure, so that the policy choices that Parliament wants to make in those procedures are not somewhat precluded by what is decided at the agreements level. Let's have a first look at what is happening at the agreements level. Now, here we have this huge creature of committees and councils that is created as agreement bodies. Here, most prominently, we have the Partnership Council. The Partnership Council has gotten the right to amend the treaty, so to make it larger, to make it bigger, without that it is covered by the ratification consent explicitly. The delegation is covered, but what is happening with this delegation is not covered. Moreover, the Council has the right to adopt binding decisions, of course, in cases only provided for in the treaty. An example for this is that the Partnership Council can approve the recognition of certain professional qualifications that is currently not foreseen by the agreement. It is worth to take a closer look at those rights. Before turning to this, we have another committee to have a closer look at, that is the regulatory cooperation one. Regulatory cooperation being an institution in which the governments of the participating parties get an early access, an early look at draft legislative and regulatory proposals, and that allows them to influence at the draft stage what could be content of future regulation. This constructs already raised highly critical remarks from the German Constitutional Court that it was announcing with regard to the CETA agreement. In CETA, we have a similar kind of structure. The German Constitutional Court, in its interim decision on the constitutionality of CETA, said that the construction as they found it is a violation of the principle of democracy. The German Constitutional Court will pronounce its final judgment on CETA on the 2nd of March. And that might have also some implications how we have to see the democratic quality of this committee structure, as it is very similar to the one of CETA. The agreement itself established a Parliamentary Partnership Assembly to check on the activities of the Partnership Council. Yet, the Assembly can only receive information and address non-binding recommendations to the Council, meaning it receives all information it might get, but it cannot attach any consequences on the basis of this information. If we look at what takes place at EU level, we have unilateral options for action foreseen by the agreement. This means the European Union can unilaterally activate clauses in the agreement that change the relationship between the EU and the UK. Most prominently, suspension and termination clauses, but also the application of remedial measures and rebalancing measures, the suspension of the UK's participation in union programs, or the initiation of dispute settlement procedures or level playing field panel procedures. This is the expression of an agreement that had little time to negotiate. It has a lot of clauses where unilaterally parties can change their relationship to each other. And that requires a certain kind of control by those who are exercising these options. Moreover, the European Commission has the right to unilaterally open market access by means of delegated rights when adopting so-called equivalence decision with regard to certain financial services. Here, Parliament is in some instances excluded because the European Commission can adopt equivalence decisions by means of implementing acts where Parliament is excluded. Moreover, Parliament cannot request the European Commission to revoke these openings in case there is a divergence in the field of financial services. If we look at the state of art that we have, the treaty says that when it comes to agreements, Parliament shall only be immediately and fully informed. This is repeated by the Council decision on signing the treaty, although it is even narrowing this more down by limiting the obligation of the Commission to inform to case as appropriate. That is also repeated by the draft Council decision on the conclusion. In my eyes, this is too little when it comes to the securing of parliamentary rights, as there are no instruments for the European Parliament to draw any consequences on the basis of the information received and examined by Parliament. The suggestions proposed that I now would like to make is, of course, the basis for any kind of parliamentary involvement is sufficient information. That the current legal framework also allows to. Yet, when we speak of decisions amending the Brexit deal, or we have decisions that are affecting the scope and the content of EU legal acts that were adopted in the ordinary legislative procedure, here there should be a prior mandating of the Commission by the European Parliament. The first reason is because this is going beyond the ratification consent. And for the second, we can call of a kind of advanced effect of the ordinary legislative procedure, as actions by the Commission might determine future outcome of legislative procedures. Moreover, Parliament should get the right to request the initiation of trade remedial measures, in particular when it comes to level playing field issues. That is, to protect its own prerogative as it decided internally on the level of protection standards by means of secondary legislation. That could be introduced either by the adoption of an interinstitutional agreement, by including it in a decision on the conclusion of the agreement, or by implementing legislation. When it comes to other trade remedies, we know regulations that give rights, for example, to trade unions or other NGOs to request from the European Commission to consider making use of trade remedies. That means also for the new rebalancing mechanism, there's going to be new secondary implementing legislation in this matter. And here Parliament could request a right to request the initiation of the rebalancing mechanism. That should be embedded in a structured dialogue between the European Parliament and the Commission, so that Parliament is always fully informed and prior to any decisions that are taken of what is going on at agreements level. When it comes to the equivalence decisions, there should be a new general legal framework to be adopted that requires that equivalent decisions may only be adopted as delegated acts so that Parliament can intervene, and that it has a right to demand the revocation of equivalence decisions. Finally, there should be an assignment of a permanent representative of the European Parliament in matters of regulatory cooperation, so that whenever the regulatory cooperation committees meet with other interested parties, a European Parliament representative is present in the room and can have early access into the information and the discussions that were taking place. A last remark in legal terms, because there might be also some legal experts in here. I am aware of the fact that Article 218 is limiting Parliament rights to receiving information. It's, however, not my understanding that this is a maximum limitation. It's a minimum requirement. The European Commission can, on the basis of an interinstitutional agreement, always go beyond the requirements set by Article 218, provided that it doesn't undermine the interinstitutional balance. So council rights. By having stronger parliamentary rights, the council rights of prior mandating the European Commission in agreement bodies is not undermined. On the contrary, it is going to make the European Commission's activities at agreement level even easier if they can secure Parliament's support in such a matter, as well as is going to strengthen the European Union's position when it comes to the implementation of the trade and cooperation agreement with the United Kingdom. So this was a rough presentation of the ideas. Thanks a lot for your attention. And I am now curious about any comments or questions. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much, René, for this excellent presentation of your study. I would love to ask now my dear colleague Bernd Lange, who plays a crucial role in this whole process, of course, as the chair of the International Trade Committee, on what he thinks about the proposals and also where do we stand in the European Parliament.
Thanks a lot, Anna, and thanks a lot, René, for the presentation. And indeed, there are some similarities to our reflection. And perhaps going a little bit back to the Lisbon Treaty, because this was, I think, the crucial moment where the European Parliament got really increased power in the field of trade policy. And with this Lisbon Treaty and this famous Article 207 and 218, René mentioned, we negotiated with the Commission an interinstitutional agreement from 2010, where we could guarantee that we as Parliament got the same level of information than the Council has. So the aim was to have a similar footing for Council and Parliament. And this was a crucial interinstitutional agreement. It took 1 year, and then it took half a year to convince the Council not to go to the European Court of Justice. Because, of course, the argumentation René mentioned, this by the Council is always there. This is a limitation, this Article 218, and not a minimum standard. Then I had the pleasure of negotiating 3 years together with Council and Commission and Parliament on this better lawmaking approach on international field. And it was not possible after 3 years to reach an agreement with the Council. So let's say the enemy in this field of parliamentary scrutiny of trade policy is in the Council. And I think this will be also a problem with the TCA. On the TCA, we have a lot of open fields. René mentioned the structure of the TCA, and looking on the concrete timelines, we have for 21 a lot of timelines on the nomination of arbitrators and experts for the panel of experts. We have a timeline for finding equivalent decision on financial services. We have the data flow question. We have then several other timelines on revision, sometimes on the rebalancing for 4 years and visually for 5 years. So there are a lot of open points where decision has to be taken. And of course, the Parliament is keen to be involved in this discussion-taking process. And there are a lot of other open items as well. Having this in mind, and having in mind this role of the Parliament in general of trade policy, of course, we are now focusing, let's say, mainly on 5 points in the discussion during this ratification process. First of all, it's really regarding access of information and documentations. So specifically regarding the TCA negotiation, the rights we got so far, that we really had access to all relevant and even restricted documents, also to consolidated text of negotiations, was not given. So this has to be guaranteed, equal access to all documents equally the Council has. And of course, we need proper information before any activity together with the joint committee, the partnership committee or other committees will start. So information and access, first one. I think this is in line with the interinstitutional agreement from 2010. Secondly, consultation. Of course, there are a lot of possible change in the agreement, and I mentioned some of the timelines. Then, of course, it is important not to have just information, but also consultation about the concrete steps the Commission has to take. So a brief right of consultation for European action. Third point, the election of arbitration. So we mentioned in the presentation that the question of rebalancing measures and of course the conflict linked to this will be crucial. And we have also for the TSD chapter, for the first time, the possibility to set remedies. So the role of the panel of experts is perhaps a little bit more important than in other trade agreements. So the election of arbitrators and the experts for the panel of experts is really crucial. And of course, normally the Parliament elected the members of the Court of Auditors, the judges of the European Court of Justice, and so on. I think this should be also a clear demand. And fourthly, and this was also the study of René, the question, who has the right to start investigations in the field of rebalancing? And who can really also decide on the concrete measures? Here, I think the European Parliament has to be also to play a key role. So specifically also regarding the start of investigations and the starting of actions. Otherwise, I could assume that the Commission is doing perhaps nothing for years and years, and this is not reflecting the level playing field we agreed on so far. So this is, in my point, perhaps the most important issue, to start investigation and have a word, a key role in the concrete measures taken in the level playing field. Fifthly, of course, part of the consent procedure, if there is some change in the agreement, has to be also crystal clear, so that the democratic process after changing relevant elements in the TCA has to be given by consent of the Parliament. So 5 key points, which were also mentioned in our resolution. We are preparing now for the consent procedure, for the ratification procedure. We will just discuss it after our webinar here in the UK coordination group, the draft of the resolution. And perhaps more important, these points were more or less, and specifically also my most important point 4 is mentioned in a letter from President Sassoli to the Commission as key points for our consent on the ratification. And we made clear that we want to have a written declaration by the Commission on these points, and we want to develop, based on these points and the written declaration, another interinstitutional agreement with the Commission specific on the TCA, because it's really elephant which has no other comparison in other agreements. So it's a quite unique elephant. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bernd, so much for this comment. I think that's really good, because it shows that actually a lot of things that are proposed in the study made it already into the Parliament's discussion, that I guess a lot of members of the European Parliament take it very seriously to fight for their own right, which is a very good thing. Before we come to the questions and answers, and I hope all of you are writing already. I see some people in the Q&A box, and please also vote the questions and answers so we can see which ones we are taking up. Just 2 remarks from my side. What I find in principle very important, this is probably one thing that is at the moment still missing, if I'm not mistaken, in the Parliament discussion, is the question on this equivalence decisions, because we see it in the matter of tax, but also data protection, that it also has a crucial impact on the internal market. And I think we should probably see if we can still add this point in all our considerations, but probably Bernd can say something on that later. What I find also important, because now we are discussing, or actually the Council is discussing and prolonging basically the deadline of until when we have to ratify. And I wonder if we should, as European Parliament, make it not really, really clear that we only ratify if we have like something in writing, or even already like an outline of this new interinstitutional agreement before we ratify, to increase a little bit the pressure, or not let out of our hand the pressure, or like the leverage we have. And I find it very interesting, Bernd, what you said, and this is very, I think, precious to have someone here who has already spent more times in the European Parliament, and is not only a newbie like me, that in the past the Council was a problem. I think this is very, very interesting, and this is probably what we can also probably take up with our national parliamentarians, because they're also keen on having more parliamentary rights. And what I find also interesting is the question of what can we also learn for other trade agreements, because like René mentioned the CETA agreement, and of course the TCA with the UK is a completely different scope. This is absolutely clear, but nevertheless there is also issues where in other trade agreements with the regulatory cooperation, the Parliament loses a little bit vis-a-vis the executive, and what kind of lessons, and could we probably bring this in also in other trade agreements. But now I would go to the questions and answers. So please, all of you who are listening, please type your questions. I probably take the first 2 ones. So the first one is from Volker Ponolite. can we really initiate? Oh my, yeah, because there's like a mistake in the question. Read and initiate and prior. Can we really initiate that the current ratification process can initiate a change process or prior to the TCA ratification? Sorry, it's a little bit complicated, but probably you can type otherwise the whole question again. That's easier for us. Should the EP insist in a new legal framework in place before data protection adequacy decision made by the Commission? That means in the next 5 months. By Michael O'Neill, thank you for that. And then by Pierre Horan, do you see any ongoing role for the European Parliament in relation to the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol? This is also a very, very important question and very up to date. So probably we can start with those 3 questions and then we take a second round. So René, do you want to start?
All right, yeah, thanks a lot, I can do that. Now, when it comes to the first question, as I understood it, is whether we can imagine that during the current ratification process, the TCA could still be changed. If I understood this question correctly, now legally speaking, everything can be done, but I consider it practically, politically speaking, but there are of course way better informed people here than me in this regard, rather difficult that the text that took already that long to somewhat get to an agreement will be opened again before it can put to ratification. So my current assessment is that there's going to be a ratification or not. That's for the Parliament to decide. And then afterwards, we see a lot of moments that actually open a process of renegotiating the content. We have actually the possibility, and what could even call it a requirement, to negotiate supplementing agreements. But also we have the general revision clause that requires that within 5 years, there must be a revision of the entire content. Yet that this is going to happen before ratification is finished, I rather consider politically not feasible, but as I said, for others to reply on this. When it comes on the data protection adequacy decision. Now, the data protection adequacy decision is precisely the problematic case that I was mentioning initially. The adequacy decision is adopted as by means of an implementing act. And the implementing act doesn't have to go through Parliament, but only through Council. So Parliament is actually out of it. Hence, it would be a case in which we would need a kind of new legal framework. But this legal framework would, in the case of the data protection adequacy decision, require a change of GDPR. And the change of GDPR would have to be initiated by the Commission, which I don't see happening for the time being. So therefore, although politically it would be good to have it, in reality, I'm afraid this is also not going to happen. Yet this is one of the prime examples that show you why all this kind of equivalence or adequacy decisions should be adopted by means of delegated act, which we have with regard to some financial services, where European Parliament could veto any of these delegations. Yeah, I think that should be it from my side.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Bernd, do you want to take up the other questions or also comment on the ones that?
Yeah, indeed, the legal situation is it as René said, so there will be no change in the text. And on the equivalence decision, I think indeed we have to find a way of a deep involvement of the Parliament. If it's really possible to change the legal situation from implemented to delegated act, let's see. But the question of consultation is important and it's an urgent question. So the deadline for the data issue is the 1st of June. So we have to deal with this quite soon. And regarding the situation that United Kingdom is trying to go ahead with other trading partners on a quite different situation on data flow and data protection on CPTD and with other countries, it's important to have a proper situation here. And yes, we want to have a written declaration before the ratification, before our consent, and we want to have a clear commitment by the Commission that we will go into a new interinstitutional agreement, and this will be our request with these strong demands by the Parliament.
And if one of you two could probably quickly reply to the Northern Ireland question, I can just report, like from my IMCO perspective, I'm chair of the Internal Market Committee, we had put in our opinion for the consent procedure our interpretation that if basically the UK fails to agree with the provisions in the withdrawal agreement, this can also trigger basically the rebalancing mechanism. But probably, I don't know, Bernd, you can quickly say something on that.
No, we have the same discussion as we have since the Partnership Council. Here it's called the Joint Committee, which happened today between Šefčovič and Graf on the implementation of the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. And the demand of the European Parliament is, of course, it's also in line with René's study, that in this joint committee and in the Partnership Council, of course, not only the Commission should be represented, but also the Parliament.
Thank you so much. So I will take a second round of questions before we finish, because I know Bernd also has to run to the UK coordination group, but let's see which other questions we have here. So there is a question by Eric White. The proposal to involve the Parliament in decision-making in the Partnership Council is contrary to Article 218.9. Article 218.7 does allow the Council to attach conditions to authorizations. So could this be used to give more power to the Parliament? So it's good that we have so many great experts here also in the audience that ask so many specific questions. Then there is a question by Gerhardus Hartmann. What do you think about the Council's decision to conclude the TCA by the EU only, not as a mixed agreement? Conclusion as mixed agreement would empower national parliaments to approve ratification at the national level, but this may result in difficulties. Do you believe the room for renegotiation between the UK-EU limits actual power of the Parliament at the EU and national level to apply real parliamentary scrutiny? So the question about the EU only was also already, I guess, heated debate in the Council or in some national parliaments. And then by Johanna Beer, does the EP have any say at the moment if any new annexes or modifications intervene to other FTAs? Is there a precedent? And then, yeah, let's see if we can have still time for 2 more questions, but this is probably already enough of stuff to answer. So again, René, do you want to start?
Sure, thanks. Now the question by Eric. First of all, I disagree with the first assessment that the proposal to involve Parliament in the decision-making of Partnership Council is contrary to 218.9. As I mentioned, my understanding is that this is a minimum requirement. And why? Because under Article 17, it's the European Parliament that controls actions of the European Commission. It has the power of political scrutiny. And therefore, whatever the European Commission does is to be supervised by the European Parliament. That is the general rule. And the exception has then to be justified from this and has to be narrow. So if the European Commission has extensive powers that have implications on the content of the ordinary legislative procedure or on the ratification consent, then this is significant enough to trigger the general control power of the European Parliament. So therefore, if the European Commission then agrees by means of interinstitutional agreement to give Parliament stronger rights, this is not per se violating paragraph 9, unless it is a violation of interinstitutional balance. And here the only thing that might be at stake is the Council's rights to only give guidance to the European Commission. And that would, let's say, become a problem once a prior mandating of the European Parliament would be different than the Council's one. But to give Parliament stronger rights would therefore per se not violate EU law, as Article 17, the control right, of the European Parliament over the European Commission prevails over the more specific rights in the TFEU. Yet the remark on paragraph 7 is of course highly interesting, because here we have a simplified revision of agreements concluded by the Union, and nothing prevents in that sense to also make use of this piece, that when the Council is authorizing this, it might include in this authorization decision a condition, a specific condition that would require that European Parliament is involved. Given the political stakes at hand, Bernd Lange was describing then that the main opponent here is actually not the Commission, but the Council. Politically, it's probably less likely that it works that the Council is giving stronger parliamentary rights than the European Commission is giving stronger parliamentary rights, as in particular, it might strengthen the European Commission's position if it has European Parliament's backing. So, and therefore, I'd say the paragraph 8 solution might be more realistic in implementing, although I do agree that the path via 7 would also be one that could be done. On EU only and mixity. Now we could reopen the whole debate on EU only, which I, at this moment of time, do not want. What we can say is it is getting a bit problematic once we are in the field of so-called shared competences between the Union and the member states, and the Union has internally not yet made use of it. This is precisely the situation in which the Council must approve that an agreement is EU only and not mixed. That is what happened here, and where it was said this was it was an absolute exception, but nevertheless it happened. Legally speaking, this is fine. It has, in my eyes, no implications for the powers of national parliaments, because either the Union has made use of its shared competence, then national parliaments are barred from action anyway, or it has not made use, and then internally national parliaments remain competent to act. The European Union is not depriving national parliaments from any rights only because they made use of shared competence in external relations. So in that sense, I do not see a limitation of national parliaments, which goes beyond the general limitation of national parliaments that we have in the field of shared competences. Yet there is an important point nevertheless to make, and that was the concern of the German Constitutional Court, that whenever a partnership council can make decisions that require only qualified majority voting for the mandating, and it has implications on national parliamentary prerogatives, that then the Commission could proceed by ignoring a vote of a national parliament, such as the German Bundestag. And that was a concern that the German Constitutional Court raised in its interim decision. And that one is certainly valid also from the perspective of national parliaments, wherefore then it was said that whenever powers or the scope of an agreement is to be extended, Commission has to request a prior mandating that is to be adopted unanimously. From that moment on, national parliaments have a veto right when scrutinizing their national government's action in council. So in that regard, I also believe that national parliaments' prerogatives are sufficiently secured, yet it might be advisable to also include a kind of a declaration that repeats this, what was done with regard to CETA, also with regard to the TCA. As regards the modifications for other FTAs, I think Bernd knows more, as he basically knows all other FTEs by heart. But it's a case-by-case question, so therefore I'm not in a position to really properly reply to this.
Thank you so much. So indeed, we can go to the final answer round by Bernd. And I just screened, there was one other question on the role of trade unions. And this is probably also an interesting topic for you, Bernd, to talk about what are actually the rights of trade unions, but also probably other civil society groups, which is also permanently a big topic when it comes to trade agreements.
Yeah, thanks a lot. On the legal explanation of René, I have nothing to add. And of course, the scrutiny right by national parliaments has to be executed. So looking to the national parliaments in Europe, so the Danish parliament is doing it quite well. It's giving always a mandate to the government. And sometimes I had this during the negotiations with the council, the situation that the Danish member asked for interruption, and then the government called the specific committee of the Danish parliament and asking if they can go ahead. The German Bundestag is not so well developed in giving a mandate to the government in all trade-related issues. But there is room for improvement, I guess. On civil society and trade unions, yeah, we have the domestic advisory groups, and we are working on further improvement. And perhaps this has to go to the Partnership Council as well. So at the moment, we have the standard chapter here in the establishment of domestic advisory groups. This should be also done during this year, by the way, the timeline is there. And there, of course, trade unions have to be playing a key role as in other domestic advisory groups and other trade unions as well. But unfortunately, the rights of DACs are limited. So they can ask for the second step of implementation control if there is something going wrong, as a violation is there. But they have no right to start the second step, the government consultation. And they have also no right to go to the panel of experts. So there is really necessity of new procedures, new rights for domestic advisory groups. And we are discussing with the Commission quite intensively, especially also with the Chief Enforcement Officer, that in future trade agreements, the procedure are a little bit different and better developed. And we have the bad example of the role of the domestic advisory groups in the South Korea agreement, where it took 7 years to get to a ruling of the panel of experts.
Yeah, thank you so much. And of course, what I find always interesting to say that for the first time, actually, we now have like kind of sanctionable environment and social standards in the TCA, which was never the case before, but the Parliament often has always asked for this. So probably this could also be an interesting point in a case for other trade agreements. But yeah, thank you so much to all of you who had been listening, but of course, especially to Professor René Repasi for writing the study and presenting it today. I think it's very, very important to have these reflections on how we can really strengthen parliamentary rights. And thanks, Bernd, also. I mean, we co-hosted together, but I thank you also now. And of course, thank you also for the people who worked in the background and preparing that. As we said at the beginning, if you want to re-watch it, it will be on the YouTube channel of the German Green delegation, and we're going to also put it, of course, on our social media channels. So thank you so much for your attention and have a great day. Bye.